G'day there, it's Dave here, Dave Mills, with another exciting video, and I've got to say that I'm really impressed with the information that I have here before you. Now, looking at this problem straight away, king's safety, we can say that, maybe the black king's a little bit more fortified, so to speak. And we can also say that white has definitely a space advantage with the pawns in the center, and even spilling out over into the sub-center there on the F file. The F pawn is playing a part, and we can see that black has the knight and the rook attacking the bishop, and the queen and rook is defending. So whenever we call that the knight has torque. Both knights have torque on D5, but also the knight has some angular, momentum, angular force, rotational force, whatever you want to call it, is actually hitting that bishop. And whenever there's a numbers matchup, equal and opposite, they're both under tension, and because the rooks are each defending it. Now, you would think that everything's fine, but remember, it's not just numbers, it's value. The total value of the defenders is 14, and the total value of the attackers is 8. So that is an imbalance there. So that tells you there's an opportunity there. Okay, just at a most basic level, because of the value of the two pieces defending versus the two pieces attacking, and so in this position here, it's black to move, obviously. So how can black take advantage of this situation and actually overwhelm the defenders? Now, obviously there's different ways of accelerating. One is a change of direction, another is retardation, and what I'm actually seeing here is I'm seeing a case of retardation, that the defense between the queen and bishop can be interfered with by the pawn, which has that activity into their territory of one square, like can advance one square into their half and attack that queen. But we see in this position, if the pawn advances now, the bishop will just lop it off, and rooks will trade, and it's not really, and that knight is loose on g6. So the position is not looking good. But remember, it's not just it's not just the numbers of the pieces defending, it's actually their value. So because I can just see such an imbalance, I'm going to look at captures against that bishop. So just automatically, just at the simple basic level, that because there's more momentum, more energy, more momentum hitting that rigid body, that fixed piece, that bishop. At the moment, the bishop can't move. It's black's move. It's fixed. Okay, so resultant forces are forces against these rigid points where they're able to combine. So let's have a look at knight takes a6, knight takes a6. Let's say rook takes a6, and it's so knight takes, rook takes, and if you advance the pawn, the rook can capture and threaten the queen. It's just all around. It's just messy. Okay, so let's try rook takes. So because the counter threat, white's counterplay against the black queen, it's unacceptable. So after knight takes, you can't do your little trick attacking the queen, because then the rook just captures your rook. And if your rook, recaptures, the queen just recaptures. So it doesn't actually play out very well. But I know there's an imbalance in my favor. Little guys beating bigger guys. So I'm going to actually look at rook takes the bishop. Okay, because I know there's a problem here. Okay, so rook take bishop looks really good to me now, because you can't recapture with the queen. The rook must recapture. Rook takes a6, and now the pawn can actually advance and attack the queen, because the rook can't be like that bishop and swing backwards. So after the pawn advances, you have the rook at a6. The rook can't go to a8 and threaten the queen. The queen is that square is defended, and the queen is under attack. So you've actually going to win a piece here. It's a double attack, and because of the value of the queen, little guy is picking on a big guy. You know, basically, I think that street rules. Doesn't matter. A little guy can take out the big guy. So the queen is a victim of its own value. That's what happened with bishops being too close to knights. They can be lopped off, and bishop pairs can be ruined. Same with the queen, and same with the heavies. They can be lopped off because they're too forward too soon, without safety. So we see that retardation. We've actually, by moving the pawn to c4, attacking the queen, the rook is under attack from the knight. We see that you've completely retarded their momentum of the queen. Where can the queen move? And so the queen, let's say, plays to d2, then knight takes rook. So you've ended up in a situation where you win a piece, you win the bishop. And that happens all the time in your position, where, particularly with beginners, they think, well, I've got 2 attacking, because they've been taught the piece count, well, 2 attacking, 2 defending. It's not as simple as that. It's the momentum of the pieces and whose turn it is to move. Okay, well, if it's white's turn to move, it's not an issue. I mean, the bishop can move to c4, blockading that c pawn, and Bob's your uncle, and can compete down the a file, against black. But in this case here, we see that the funny situation where the value doesn't add up, the momentum doesn't add up, but it doesn't add up because your pieces are less, not more. Okay, so that is actually a very, very interesting thing. It's your move, and you have the tempo, and so you can, remember type 1? So this is actually really a combination of different types of accelerating, but you're still accelerating your position. And they're caught flat-footed. And when you the funny thing is, when you recapture the rook, that's actually a bit of a battery, and that actually discovers the queen's defense of the knight at g6. So your position just holds, and it stays strong. And so that's it. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. And we can see here, white's actually done a lot of things right. Black has actually done a lot of things, has played on the queen side, has played very aggressively, open lines on the queen side. And white has actually just gotten ahead of itself. And because of that, has actually, that force that pulls you forward can actually be a lure that pulls you into a trap, and that's what we see here. And so obviously all those resultant forces are combining and acting on a rigid piece and square. And I say it's rigid because it's not your turn to move, and or it could be just a fixed point. Now, obviously, all pieces have points of application. Okay, so what is a point of application? Well, the knight and rook are applying themselves to a6, and the queen and rook are applying themselves to a6. And so the question is, because it's black to move, what to do? And if you understand the maths of the pieces, you see that the value matchup favors black. It's not equal and opposite, and that's actually fantastic for the attacker. And the fact is that pawn is active. The value of the pawn is 1, and it's able to move 1 square into their territory, so 1 by 1. But it's actually surprisingly powerful. And obviously, the effect on the position is different okay, for different points of application. That's just logic, right? And so for this reason, pieces can become bound to their points of application. And that's what's sort of happened here. The queen and rook are bound to a6, and that's not good for them. And so, because the bishop doesn't defend itself, and even though the bishop's defended twice, which makes it appear strong, it's actually weak. It's you're only as strong as the assuming your opponent can't remove your defenders. So obviously, defending or attacking, rigid pieces or squares, it's like a slice in time, and the queen just can't, and the rook can't. They're bound to it. And you can interfere with that, it's all over. Obviously, bound pieces are pieces that are bound to their point of application, and in this case, black's able to take advantage of it. And so I hope you've got a lot from this video. We'll talk about how resultant forces, obviously, that you develop in the opening, when you're development momentum, obviously leads to torque on the position. You want to play with your knights. And that can actually have significant forces quite early. So obviously I've also talked about forces that are balanced, tension. And even though we just saw how the balance of those forces, we also saw how torque, the fact that knight is not as valuable actually paid off here. And balance forces, obviously, it's about tension, building tension, and torque is about putting the knights in a situation where they're putting a position under strain, and particularly the squares around the king or around the center, putting torque on their position earlier rather than later is very, very important. Very, very important question. And so that's why I like to say some opening like the French defense, it has tension, but it also has torque. There's actually pressure applied to those center pawns, and also if the opponent chooses to do the exchange variation, then the knights have a very freewheeling path to e4 and c4, and so very, very strong. So that's it. So resultant forces through development, and obviously balanced forces all come through your development, and obviously torque and tension, it combines to produce those forces that to produce your momentum. Like with tension, the net force can be 0, but it can release the longer you have time on target. The more duration you have, the bigger the momentum that comes from it, so that it can just sweep through it. Once again, give you the French defense as a perfect example. So balanced forces, I do a capital F and a capital little tiny capital B in the top right corner, and with resultant forces I do a little R, and so that gives you an idea. So we're going to talk about the moment of force, which is the moment that obviously it uses torque. The moment of force is using the angular momentum to combine on a point of application. So basically, it's a really great way of thinking about knights are levers that turn the position in your favor. The fact they can move at right angles is just very, very significant. All right, take care. Bye.